In this video, I will give you an introduction to the use of these so-called smart drugs, from stimulants to psychedelics, and outline what can be expected from their use. So stay tuned. Welcome to my channel. My name is Samuel Kohtala. I'm a neuropharmacologist studying the mechanisms of drug action in the brain. So, the topic of today's introductory video is the use of smart drugs or cognitive enhancers to perhaps gain an edge over those who don't use drugs like that. It's clear that a lot of people are engaging in the use of cognitive enhancers, but what remains unclear is whether these drugs are truly giving people the benefits they are seeking. Let's start the discussion with the most commonly used cognitive enhancer in the world, coffee. The main active methylxanthine alkaloid is of course caffeine. Now, apart from purely enjoying the taste of coffee and its social implications, caffeine is obviously something that is consumed when one feels tired or fatigued. With the help of a cup of coffee, a task that was impaired by tiredness can be perhaps continued for a little bit longer. Professional drivers, for example, may take caffeine pills to better maintain wakefulness while driving, and students may do so to study through the night. There are obvious problems in both of these practices, but caffeine generally serves its purpose. It fights away sleepiness to an extent. The enhancement of wakefulness and the fighting away of fatigue is a common perspective of use for most cognitive enhancers, but not all. These include drugs like amphetamines, which are also used as medications for treating attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or drugs like Modafinil that special forces use to stay awake during prolonged operations. Modafinil is particularly very effective as a wakefulness-promoting agent, and it is commonly used in the treatment of narcolepsy, a neurological disorder that disrupts the ability of the brain to control its sleep-wake cycles. Now, as I mentioned, cognitive enhancement is not only about producing stimulation or promoting wakefulness. Some other types of drugs are used to particularly enhance learning, memory, and perhaps even creativity. In fact, the early definition of the term nootropic, coined by Corneliu Giurgea in the 1970s, specifically describes drugs that possess little or no toxicity and virtually no adverse effects. This term came to life from the discovery of the effects of piracetam, perhaps the first true modern nootropic drug. And indeed, it is virtually non-toxic and devoid of typical psychostimulant effects. Unfortunately, to my knowledge, there is only solid evidence of the cognitive enhancing properties of these racetams in elderly people suffering from cognitive decline. There are very few high-quality studies in young adults or healthy individuals, and those that exist generally show very minor effects in tasks like word recall. Here, it is worth mentioning the distinction between medical use and the use outside of it. In the medical context, for example, the objective can be to maintain or restore cognitive function in patients suffering from Alzheimer's disease, and thus perhaps postpone the need for daily caretaking and assistance. Outside of the medical context, I find the term cosmetic neurology a good term to describe the use of smart drugs. Similar to how one may resort to plastic surgery to enhance one's facial features or other features, cosmetic neurology aims to enhance one's cognitive capabilities despite the fact that there was nothing wrong with them to begin with. Here we also stumble into the territory of psychological issues and mental health disorders. There is, for example, body dysmorphia, which can mean that there is a ruminative tendency over one's perceived defects or flaws in appearance. And I believe something similar exists for the mind. The obsessive tendency to seek putative aids for perceived cognitive deficits from pharmaceuticals, and in this case from smart drugs. Apart from this, many heavy users of smart drugs may also suffer from depression, anxiety, ADHD, and maybe treating their symptoms through the use of cognitive enhancers. Now, let me be clear. There are truly many people who suffer from cognitive deficits, depression, anxiety, and so on. And it is not my intention to belittle their suffering or their experience of their cognitive problem. But we do live in a culture that still stigmatizes mental health, promotes the myth of self-made geniuses, and essentially tells you, you can do anything, it's all up to you. And in my opinion, the population of heavy smart drug users is often comorbid with other issues, and fixing those issues could perhaps serve them better than the use of these so-called cognitive enhancers. The notion of you can be anything requires the will to do in the work. To reach a difficult goal, you need the motivation to work hard, make sacrifices, to focus on moving towards that goal. And being a professional procrastinator, I know all too well that sometimes motivation is difficult to find. This is where I believe many people turn to dopaminergic stimulants. Since dopamine is a key neurotransmitter involved in motivational control, essentially learning what things in the world are good and what are bad, and choosing appropriate actions to gain the good things and to avoid the bad things. For something like intense studying, the reward is often far in the future, something difficult to grasp. Instead, you may grab your smartphone, fire up social media, and spend hours just scrolling through the content for instant satisfaction. The way most social media platforms, mobile games, and apps are built relies on the dopamine system. It wouldn't be far off to say that these apps are made to hijack your motivational control, offering a rapid, intermittent, and repeating rewards. If you think about how much easier it is for you to just consume rewards on your smartphone when compared to a session of prolonged studying, you may get the gist of why some people choose to take a pill that increases your dopamine levels in order to have a better drive to study. The boost of dopamine can influence the way the brain evaluates whether a mental task is worth the effort. Indeed, studies of drugs like methylphenidate suggest that they shift the attention from the challenges of undertaking a difficult task to its rewards. They do also promote wakefulness and produce maybe a better level of focus, but a significant portion of effects may be actually separate from an actual change in ability. Drugs like nicotine may partly influence similar mechanisms of dopamine action, while it also acts on nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. Needless to say, any drugs affecting dopamine levels have a relatively high risk of addiction. The problem, at least for some people, is that once the body gets used to the external drugs modulating the dopaminergic tone, achieving similar levels of perceived ability may be difficult to reach without these drugs. And most importantly, after long-term use, performance without the drugs is likely to suffer, at least temporarily. One interesting double-blind randomized controlled study looked at the effects of modafinil, methylphenidate, and caffeine on chess players and their success. The study found that those under the effects of methylphenidate and modafinil lost more games on time when compared to controls, suggesting that these players perhaps took more time to plan out their moves. If the games lost on time were taken out of the equation, on average, the players on stimulants had a very slight advantage on the remainder of the games. However, the caffeine group did not have any clear edge over controls. Let's see what Magnus Carlsen has to say about chess doping.
I think there are probably experiments to be made. I mean, people use drugs to both prepare for and to do exams, for instance. I assume they could possibly help in chess as well. If at some point my level of chess drops drastically, I might start experimenting. But for now, I don't see the need.
So I guess Magnus doesn't need any doping. Well, These and other studies demonstrate, at least to me, that the positive effects of these most established cognitive enhancers are very mild, and they can also lead to adverse outcomes. Now, another class of smart drugs are cholinergic drugs. These drugs have been particularly developed for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Acetylcholine is one of the neurotransmitters involved in cognitive processes, and the cholinergic system is implicated in many forms of dementia. Acetylcholine present in the synaptic cleft is broken down by the enzyme acetylcholinesterase. This class of drugs, known as cholinesterase inhibitors, prevent the enzyme from breaking down acetylcholine, thus increasing its synaptic effects. Pharmaceuticals like donepezil or rivastigmine are medications for Alzheimer's disease, while plant-based supplements containing huperzine A are used by some. These drugs have cognition-enhancing properties in those suffering from cognitive decline, but there is less evidence for healthy individuals. Some studies suggest that drugs like donepezil may enhance, for example, long-term memory recall, but to my knowledge, the effects seen in the few studies are relatively small. Finally, the hot topic of recent years has been the use of psychedelic microdosing for cognitive enhancement. The idea of microdosing is to consume such small doses of psychedelics that the psychoactive effects are not prominent, while still providing a perceived boost to cognitive capabilities. There have been only a few studies investigating microdosing so far, but multiple larger trials are likely to surface in the upcoming years. My impression of the current literature is that there is no solid evidence to back up the claims of beneficial effects caused by psychedelic microdosing. But ultimately, time will tell. That's pretty much all for today. This video was really meant for a brief introduction to the topic of smart drugs and cognitive enhancers, so I just really grasped the surface here. Let me know if you're interested to hear more about this topic or a particular group of drugs, and feel free to leave comments and suggestions in the field down below. Also remember to press like and subscribe to my channel for future neuropharmacology content. Thank you for watching, and until next time.